Well, good morning. My name is Doug Howard. I'm the president of Growth Team Strategies, here with another episode of Selling the Dream, our podcast for business owners who are either thinking about selling the business or should be thinking about what their end game might look like so they can give themselves some good options. I'm here with my co-host, Kathi Fleck, and she's always full of exciting ideas, and she actually makes a great straight person for my comedy. She's kind of like the Ed McMahon of this operation. So that's that's a good thing.
He's
And
much
we're also
better
joined
looking than
by Paula Kruger, who is with a company called IAG, and let her explain a little bit about that. She's been a guest of ours before, and we get really great response when Paula's on one of our episodes. So we appreciate you being here. So welcome, Paula.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So why don't you give folks just real quick an idea of what IAG is, what you do, and why we care about what you have to say?
Well, we're basically merger and acquisition advisors, and we help people who own companies find a buyer when they're ready to sell. We also help them prepare to sell. There's sometimes a lot of steps that need to be taken to put their house in order. And we work with them to make sure that they have all their ducks in a row so that they can get the optimal dollar for their business.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, for those that don't know, Kathi, you had the experience of working with IAG when you sold your business, when you sold your company.
Right, exactly. And I had one option, and that was to bring in an outside buyer. But that doesn't mean those are the only options. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to bring Paula on today to talk to people about another opportunity.
Right. So, back in the day when we were having conversations about Kathy's business, none of us could probably have predicted that we would be these international rock stars of succession planning that we are today, with the millions and millions of people that are probably watching this broadcast. So that's exciting. So, Paula, what are you seeing right now? There's a lot going on in the world, and there's always a little bit of turbulence, but guesswork on interest rates, guesswork on election, and, those kinds of things. It's like, is it having an impact on people selling, on the activity level you're seeing, or even just how people are thinking about selling their businesses? Like, what are you seeing today?
Yeah, great question, Doug. It turns out that very often sellers have a lot of trepidations about putting their business on the market. And they see all the chaos in the economy, and they say, who's going to want to buy my company? Are we ever going to be able to find a buyer? When in fact, in reality, there are many more buyers than there are sellers. And as soon as a company goes on the market that's prepared properly, that company gets lots of interest. So it's really critical for every company owner to make sure, number one, that their financials are in order. It's not a good idea to be doing your profit and loss statements and balance sheets on the back of a napkin. Ideally, you have an accountant or a professional bookkeeper working with you to make sure all your finances are in order, because that's the number one problem that we have with a lot of business owners who haven't paid enough attention to making sure that their financial statements are accurate, up to date, etc. So that's all really important. Making sure your inventory numbers are accurate. So those are the kinds of things we go through with sellers to make sure that they put everything in order before they go to market. Because once they go to market, the buyers are there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, it's always interesting to me, and I guess maybe I'm sensitive to this, having had an accounting firm for a lot of years, but I'm amazed how many people get to the end of their business and have to get their books in order. And it's like, how are you even managing the business? Like, what are you working from in terms of key indicators? And, I was just at a conference where I was speaking to a number of wood flooring contractors. And one of the interesting things was that, for a lot of them, it's still very informal in terms of the way they manage. And we get into this whole discussion about working in the business and on the business. And the vast majority of their time is spent working in the business and they
Yeah.
know they should be working on it, but they don't necessarily know what that means. But I agree, financial statements that tell you what the heck's going on, probably a good place to start.
Another thing that we've seen, Paul and I have seen with some potential sellers is that they use a lot of their company money for personal items, and it really devalues the company as they're getting their financials ready. I think, Paula, you had a suggestion to one seller that we talked to that said, okay, you really need a couple years at least of having very accurate books because they're going to go back 3 to 5 years and take a look at that. And you're not going to have the value of your business for a buyer if you end up using a lot of money to travel or buy your toys and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that is a great point, Kathy, and that's something we see all the time. Business owners will put everything through their company because they want to save some tax dollars.
Mhm.
Well, if they get to save 50 cents on the dollar for because of the taxes and the deductions that they've taken, they've really hurt themselves, because we can get them $3 for every dollar that's on the bottom line. So, I had one seller who was ready to go on the market. And at the end of 23, he decided that he was going to pay off all of his truck loans and ended up with a negative balance on his P&L.
Mm-hmm.
And that just blew him out of the water. As a result, it made no sense for him to go to market for at least another couple of years to get his finances back in order again. So you're right, Kathy. People put their kids through private school on their business, or cell phones. Huge. One gentleman that we were just reviewing his finances. He pays $100,000 of life insurance every year.
Mm.
So it's amazing the expenses that they put through their business, which really does hurt them in the end, and really means that they shouldn't go on the market until they clean up their books.
And usually by the time they come to you, they're ready to sell. So that's really disheartening to say, okay, I need another 3 to 5 years to get this cleaned up.
Yeah, that's right, because SBA wants a minimum of 3 years of profitability, minimum of $50,000 a year in order for them to even consider giving a buyer a loan. So they need 3 years of good finances in order for a buyer to be able to get the SBA loan, which is how 90% of the buyers pay for the business that they want to buy. So, and SBA is a government program. They are real sticklers. Everything's got to be accurate, provable, and if they say, well, I had $100,000 expense for my insurance, you need to be able to prove it, because you can't just say it and the bank says, oh, okay, in that case, we'll add $100,000 to the bottom line. They need to see all the documentation. So documentation is also very important when you're getting ready to sell your business.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Paula, because, with our company, we obviously do consulting for folks when they're in the succession mode, and we have our 5 years to go model. And, we picked 5 years really very specifically for the fact that if you're just starting to think about some of these things, and we go through this checklist of your financials and your processes and how much you do in the business and all these other factors, and you have changes to make, it takes a little while to make those changes. And then you want that 3-year pristine period of time where the business truly gets to shine. And then, and even that's a little bit dependent on what's going on in the world and the marketplace and that. And then, some period of time to be able to actually put it on the market and sell. It's like people really need to think about this stuff ahead of time. But I know when I had the accounting practice, it was not unusual for people to bring me in when they were thinking about buying a business, right? And, the first thing you look for are the things that are anomalies, things that don't look right, anything that's going to sort of, first of all, give you a little bit of a negotiating place when you're looking at it. But secondly, to answer the question for the customer, is this business really worth the kind of money that they're asking me for?
Yeah.
Right. And I know we've seen this with a couple of things that we've worked on together, is as soon as somebody shows somebody something. And it can be a relatively obscure thing, I think, in some cases, but it's clearly not accurate. It kind of casts a cloud over the whole of what the financial information represents, don't you think?
Oh, you are absolutely right. Buyers, when they see that there's an error that is either just a misstatement or, deception, that's it. They are usually done. They don't want to take the chance because these people are going to be taking out huge loans to buy these companies. So their futures are on the line,
Yeah.
and they want to be confident that the information that they're looking at is accurate and up to date. So you couldn't be more right about that, Doug.
Yeah, it's interesting because right now, between now and the end of the year, we're adding to our organization some additional business services for marketing, HR, and for accounting, using some outsourced folks that we've vetted and that kind of thing. And we're really thinking right now that a big part of that is going to be for anybody that we're talking about with succession. We're going to have them go through with our accounting folks a scrutiny to say, like, if it was our job to pull this apart, from the buyer's perspective, let's do that right now. Like, for instance, when I had the accounting firm, if someone had an audit, which, thank God we didn't have too many of those, but if they did, we did a pre-audit to figure out like where we were strong and where we were weak and what we needed to document better and what we needed to. And it's like, in going through that before somebody else is looking at it and saying, this isn't right, I think can be very valuable.
Mm-hmm.
But the hardest thing, and Kathi and I talk about this a lot, is how do you get folks that have been in business for 15 or 20 years and their runways maybe another 3 to 5 years to actually think about this stuff before they get to the, oh yeah, I'm going to retire next year kind of thinking, which leaves us no time to do anything.
Yeah, well, and as Kathi can attest to the fact that, she worked with you for a number of years before she put her company on the market. And IAG won't even take on a client until they have a certified valuation prepared for the company. And that requires really good financials, very thorough. They look at your tax returns, they look at your P&Ls. So it's kind of a rigorous process. But if your books are in order, it works just fine. And it went very smoothly for Kathi. And once that valuation was done and we were able to ascertain what her company was worth, we were able to put it on the market and sell the company as a result. So that preparation is absolutely vital to a smooth process and ultimate success in selling the company.
Yeah. Now, Paul, I was just in front of a group of folks that, some of them very successful, a lot of them, service businesses, contractors, that I don't think they even really, a lot of them believe they had anything worth selling, and a lot of service businesses, just in having conversations with folks, a lot of times, and you kind of alluded to this, their succession plan is A, do the kids want it?
Yeah.
Or B, do I have a ready-made successor in the company? Or maybe I'm going to just finish my last project and move on. I had someone that called me about a year and a half ago and said, I really can't do much succession planning because I don't know what the kids are going to want to do or if they're going to have an interest in the business. And I said, well, I understand that can be a challenge. How old are the kids? And he said 8 and 9. And I said, well, yeah, no, if these damn elementary schoolers would get their act together, I blame the school system, right? If in the third grade planning better than that, but that's kind of the challenge is sometimes the ages and the timing don't line up, right? And I tell people but there's a certain path that you want to go down, whether it's the kids or a leadership team or an outside person. And I love to tell stories because I think people remember the stories. And I did on last week when I was presenting, and I said, people start down the path of succession planning. If they can't answer every question, they stop. Right? They get stuck and they leave it and they don't pursue it. And then they come back to it later on when they're like, yeah, we should be thinking about it. And then they get stuck again. I said, to me, it's like if I leave Maryland where I'm located and head down to Orlando, at some point I have to figure out what exit I'm going to get off, right? But for the first 8 hours of driving, all I need to do is drive in the right direction and get, you know what I mean? There will be a time to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like succession planning is kind of like that, right? If I head down the path and do things like good financials, strong margins, a talented team, written processes, like I'm heading down that path, whether I keep the business, sell the business, the kids take it, someone buys it. You know what I mean? And it's just,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's too little folk. They get so stymied by like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I just don't do anything in terms
Right.
of purpose.
And some of the steps are so easy to take. For example, well, when we get buyers, there are two key questions that they ask right away. Why are they selling? And is there someone who can take their place? Because incredibly, there are a lot of people out there in the market now buying companies who don't want to run it themselves. And ideally, they want someone who's been in the company, working for the owner, who can step into his or her shoes. So
Yeah.
it's just so easy to make sure that there's someone in your company who is being trained to do what you do. That is so critical.
Yeah.
And you want that backup. So sometimes a buyer will ask, well, how many weeks a year do they take off? No one wants to hear that they can't take a vacation because the business can't run without them.
Mm-hmm.
And even for the seller themselves, they should want to be able to have that kind of flexibility to take off when they need to. Everybody needs to take
Mm-hmm.
off some time. So it's really paramount that they have someone in training to take over their role as part of their planning.
Yeah. And Paula, to your point, I remember when I was selling my accounting practice, two of my kids were just on the cusp of being old enough to at least have that conversation with me. And they both said the same thing. They said, Dad, you made this look so not fun,
Yeah.
right? The amount of work, the amount of stress, because I was notorious for, the family's going to the beach for a week. I'll be there Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But it was like a week at the beach. That was just not even a thing, right? And of course, you realize the older you get, there was nothing I did in those 4 days that couldn't have waited
Mm-hmm.
probably.
Mhm.
But I think there's that notion, and then on top of it, just this whole idea of starting to transition stuff. Whether people are selling or not, it just makes for a more manageable business. I think people burn out less or get less claustrophobic in the business if they can say, I think there's and again, I'm not against retirement. I think retirement's an important thing. But for a lot of people, it's like I work and work and work like a maniac and hopefully get this alternate lifestyle in retirement, right?
Mhm.
Where I don't have to work and I have money and I can go do things. And, partly because I can't imagine myself retiring, but partly because like I don't want to be that person that worked and worked and worked and had this great retirement plan and dropped dead before I got to do it. Right.
Yeah.
I think you've got to build in a much better work-life balance anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And like you said, ironically, that return of, 3-to-1 on things that you're doing successfully, I just think is a calculation that a lot of times people don't take into consideration.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important to talk to the experts, to people like you and your folks who really know how to put a plan in place, how to execute the plan. Kathy can tell you, there were so many times during the course of our process to sell her company that she'd be meeting with people who did what she did, own companies like hers, and she'd come back and say, they tell me I'm crazy. I'm never going to get the money that we're asking for this business.
Mm-hmm.
That they told me it's worth a third of what, but
Uh-huh.
everybody thinks they're an expert about selling companies. But
Right.
you really have to depend on the experts to
Mm-hmm.
put your help you put your business in a good situation like you do with your clients, and then to work with someone who knows how to sell companies.
Yeah.
You wouldn't ask your lawyer to do your accounting, and you don't ask your accountant to help you with the legal aspects. It really is very important to work with people who are experts at what they do to get you top dollar for your company.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. And you shouldn't work with your mother-in-law who's the bookkeeper or your brother-in-law who's an attorney. But those are just my phobias, right? So a couple of things I hear you say that I think are really important. One is, start early in the planning process. Second is really getting those numbers dialed in, right? Third is kind of surrounding yourself with some experts that can take you through the process. All seem to be things that either people do and they have a good experience, or they learn the hard way. But you really only get one shot at selling these businesses, really.
That's exactly right. And and all of these business owners are really good at what they do because they've built these amazing companies, but that's their expertise. So hopefully they understand that they really need to work with the people who are going to help them sell the company, prepare it for sale, and enable them to go off and do whatever else they want to do after they sell. That's part of why I enjoy doing this, because seeing people who have worked for 20, 30 years so hard at building these companies finally get to go off and have a second chapter and do something else that's really fun. So that's another thing that you should be thinking about, because I hear that from business owners all the time. I don't know what I would do if I retired or if I sold my company. So start thinking about that too. That should also be part of your planning process.
Right.
Well, and Paula, I can speak firsthand that I know Kathi is having more fun working with us than she's ever had in her entire life. Right?
Plus, I don't have all that burden hanging over my head like I used to.
She has no burden, lots of laughs, very fulfilled. So yeah, I mean, not everybody's going to hit it right like Kathi did, but no, I think that's a really good point. So, all right, well, we're going to leave it there for today, but thank you so much for the insights. I think it's important for people to think about. Hopefully people start thinking about this stuff, and we're pushing different organizations and associations, like, just expose your business owners, your members, to this kind of thinking early on. You do them such a big favor if they have some of this in their thinking. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, it's been a pleasure being here with you today.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Kathi, any last thoughts?
No, I think you hit it. That's very good.
All right. Well, then we will be back in another week with another episode of Selling the Dream. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Selling the Dream podcast, starring Doug, Howard, and Kathi Fleck. Both Doug and Kathi have built and sold successful businesses and hope this podcast will help other small business owners do the same. Tune in every week to hear more tips for increasing the value of your company so you get the highest return for your years of hard work when it comes time to sell or transition your business. Can't wait till next week? Check out our website for more information at www.growththemes.com.